Mr. Mayor, members of council, again, honored to be here, and fellow citizens, not only present here, but watching online. Colonel Pat Kinsman, again, honored to be the 59th Commander, Norfolk District, and going to provide an update on the Deep Creek Bridge replacement project. And I would first say, again, thanks for your leadership during a very tough time for our nation, but I would also like to say thanks to the council for their support, as well as to the city manager and his staff for the continued collaboration that we've had on this very, very challenging project. So in addition to City Manager Chris Price, Earl Sorley, Bob Geis, Troy Eisenberger, Mike Wilkinson, the entire city attorney staff for certain, and certainly many, many others. And so thank you. It's a team effort to work this. In January, at the Deep Creek public meeting, I did my very best to convey what I thought the three issues were, and they were essentially real estate acquisition, acquiring all real estate interests, both fee and easements necessary for the project. Number two is utility relocations, which the Army Corps of Engineers has no control over. And number three, which is additional funding, which again, I do not control. And so, what I'd like to report, Mr. Mayor, is that we've had minor progress on those three fronts. I'm absolutely not satisfied with that project, and I know that the citizens of Chesapeake and specifically Deep Creek are not satisfied. But as I said in January, I'm confident the bridge is going to be built, and we're committed to getting it done. Since January, not only have engaged with my commander and senior civilians within one level up, but most recently in Washington with the headquarters of the Corps, with the chief of the real estate, the chief legal or lead attorney, and also our director for all civil works projects across the Corps. And I impressed upon them, number one, and honestly, reputational risk for the Corps because it's such a challenging project, but to ask for their assistance on the real estate and the funding actions as those specific items get up to the headquarters of the Corps. Like in January, in my brief update tonight, I can't talk about specific landowners, but I do want to clear up a potential misconception about the federal government's ability to negotiate with landowners. And again, through my staff, I've heard that there may be a misperception out there. And certainly, we cannot negotiate, but we want to ensure that a fair and effective compensation is given to anyone deprived of land. So I will just read the statement. It says, the federal government, through the Department of Justice, works with the courts to ensure that the process is fair to everyone and that citizens receive fair compensation for their property. This means that agencies like the Corps of Engineers do not just represent the government, but are charged to be fair in the process to everyone, including the taxpayers. The government only pays fair market value for property, and if owners believe their property is worth more, they must present clear evidence to support their position on fair market value. All landowners must understand what is involved in a federal acquisition process, and we hope they will work with our team to reach agreement. So, Mr. Mayor, if there is time, I will go into some specifics with respect to, first, the real estate acquisition. In January, we were at 32 of 40 parcels acquired. Certainly appreciate the council's effort to acquire parcels. We are now at 33 of 40 parcels, so only one has been accomplished. The 7 remaining, my understanding, the city is acting on one other parcel, and the 6 remaining parcels are in condemnation. Those condemnation packets have been reviewed initially all the way up to the headquarters Corps of Engineers level. In that review, it was determined that we needed to have an updated appraisal. That appraisal contract should be issued this week, and we expect the appraisals to come back in early August, and so those condemnation packets will go forward through the Corps of Engineers, through the Senior Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army, and then on to the Department of Justice. My current estimate, right, and I can't control Department of the Army or DOJ, is March of 21 is when we expect, and that's, again, obviously with a huge grain of salt. Our headquarters lead counsel has engaged the Department of Justice to let them know that this important project is coming. Next is utility relocations. The Corps has achieved another relocation agreement. So now all 4 utility companies have an agreement with the Corps and can proceed. We are now facilitating real estate easement discussions between those respective utility companies and the landowners. Half of those easements have been achieved, and the remaining 14, so 14 of 28 are still needed, and they involve 7 properties, and 2 easements are for, 2 of those easements are properties that are involved in condemnation. And what we've heard is that those utility companies, or some utility companies that are involved with condemnation, will not start relocation of those utilities until, of course, they have the underlying real property interests. That's a lot of information. I think the bottom line is current estimate, again, not controlling the utility companies, so with a large asterisk, September 21, because that is the time for not only the agreements to be complete, but the utility companies to do the construction work and move those utilities. And that, ladies and gentlemen, I believe is our current longest pole in the tent or most difficult thing to achieve. Now, lastly, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, funding. So we have recertified the cost, and the cost is now, overall project cost estimate is $58.7 million, which means that additional $9.9 million is required. This that overall cost estimate includes about 14% for contingency if needed. The short of the long story is through our civil works process, we're providing what's called a validation report. That validation report becomes a director's report signed off by the Senior Director of Civil Works, and that goes to Congress requesting the current authorization for Deep Creek Bridge be increased to $58.7 million. An associated effort, and excuse me, one more thing. We anticipate that director's report should be going to the authorization committee in Congress by about mid-August, and our hopes is that will get included in the Water Resource Development Act of 2020. Congress has been doing these about every 2 years, and we anticipate that they will pick up the discussions and deliberations for that particular act in mid-August. An associated but important effort beyond authorization is the actual funding itself, and the opportunity for that is in what we call the work plan, the Civil Works work plan for fiscal year 21 through an energy and water appropriations bill. If I could sum up that, Mr. Mayor, members of council, again, when I briefed in January and said the projected schedule is what we hope for if these things work out. In summary, they haven't worked out the way we wanted. And so we've added, I think, about a year to the project. And that's not what anybody wants to hear. It's not what I want to hear. And I'm continuing to work this particular project to the very best of my ability. Pending your questions.
Colonel, first of all, let me just thank you for being here tonight. It really is very kind of you to be and to bring us an update. It's never easy to deliver bad news, but your honesty, your forthrightness, and we believe that you are giving your best efforts to move this thing forward. Very complicated. Obviously, you started off by saying it has been a team effort, and you thanked us for that, but it's obvious that that team's got to get bigger because you've got a lot of other players that we need to get on board in all three of these areas that you just spoke to. And so thank you again for being here tonight and for being available. So we appreciate all your efforts and your professionalism. So a motion is now in order.
Second.
Who moved? Mr. Parker moved for approval and seconded by Dr. Dietrich. Is there any discussion, Mr. Parker? No. Ms. Ritter?
Just a question, if I might, I guess to the manager. Could we take the portion of the Colonel's comments having to do with the update and please put them on whatever web circulation that we have so that people interested in the program could be able to view that themselves, and perhaps on other social media outlets or on the website, just put a notice that we had an update on this particular day. Thank you, Colonel. If there is ever a maze, it's certainly the federal procurement and approval process. So thank you very much for all your efforts. There are thousands of people who appreciate what you're trying to do for them. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Ritter. I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that is really the best that we can do for our citizens is to keep them, give them the same amount of knowledge that we have. So I certainly appreciate that. Mr.
Which
Best.
is not much, but they do need to
It's an
know.
update, absolutely. Yes, Mr. Best.
Thank you. Colonel, thank you for this update. It's very timely, and obviously there's a lot of interest in citizens, especially those who live and reside in the Deep Creek area and traverse that bridge on a daily basis. I think you understand the gravity of this. I know that you've been right up front, and like the mayor said, very honest with that. We appreciate it. What is now your estimate? You say it moved it a year. Are we talking 24, 25, 26? What will you estimate to be a new date that we could begin letting people know that we could expect some kind of outcome?
Yes, sir. I guess, so when I say move it a year, in January, we hope to be done with acquisition and be advertising a construction contract this fall. So fall of 20 with a construction award in early 21. And so what, adding a year, we hope to, again, pending all the things I talked about, but advertising in September of 21 for a construction contract and awarding that in January, February, March of 22.
Okay. All right. Fine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.